Well, good morning, everybody. Go ahead and stand up. We're actually going to learn a new song together. We're going to teach you the chorus, and it goes like this. You are the Lord Almighty, outshining all the stars in glory. Your love is like the wildest ocean. Oh, nothing else compares. Come on, can you sing that with me? You are the Lord Almighty, yeah. Outshining all the stars in glory. Your love is like the wildest ocean. Oh, nothing else compares. Your love so great, Jesus in all things. I've seen a glimpse of your heart, 8 billion years, and still I've been singing. How can I praise you enough? How can I praise you enough? You are the Lord. Yes, you are the Lord Almighty, outshining all the stars in glory. Your love is like the wildest ocean. Oh, nothing else compares. Creation calls all to the Savior. We are alive for your praise. In earth and sky, no one is higher. Our God wonders you reign. Our God wonders you reign. You are the Lord. You are the Lord Almighty, outshining all the stars in glory. Your love is like the wildest ocean. Oh, nothing else compares. You are the Lord Almighty, outshining all the stars in glory. Your love is like the wildest ocean. Oh, nothing else compares. Not to us, but to your name, we lift up all praise. Sing that with me, come on. Not to us, but to your name, we lift up all praise. Not to us, not to us, but to your name, we lift up all praise. Not to us, not to us, but to your name, we lift up all praise. You are the Lord Almighty, outshining all the stars in glory. Oh, your love is like the wildest ocean. Oh, nothing else compares. You are the Lord Almighty, outshining all the stars in glory. Your love is like the wildest ocean. Oh, nothing else compares. Come on, you know it. Not to us, but to your name, we lift up all praise. Not to us, not to us, but to your name, we lift up all praise. Come on. Not to us, but to your name, we lift up all praise. Not to us, but to your name, we lift up
Well, good morning. It's good to see you. Hey, it is genuinely good to see you. That's true. Are you guys feeling good today? You feeling good? Yeah, 9 o'clock was fired up. And I got here this morning. I got out of my car and I took a deep breath. And I just love the crisp, clean air of town of Gilbert. You know what? We're going to miss it when it's gone. If you know what I'm talking about, maybe you just need to wake up a little earlier, be more downwind. But it smelled great. But I'm glad that you're here today. Seriously, if you're brand new to this place, I just want to say welcome to you. If this is your first time or first time in a long time, I'm going to invite you to a place that we call the Hub. So right after services, you can go out in the lobby. There's a team out there that would just love to say hello and give you a free gift for being here. Hey, and it is the one-stop shop to get connected beyond the weekend. So if you're here at Mission, you're looking to get baptized, you want to place membership, you want to join a small group, whatever it is that you have questions about, that's the place to go. It's the one-stop shop. It's called the Hub, and that team is waiting for you right after services. Well, hey, I got one thing I want to call you to. It is third Sunday next week. If you know what that means, it is Love Works Sunday. So every month, on the third Sunday of each month, we pick a partner that we want to rally around. And this month, we're going to rally around the House of Refuge right down the street. You guys know the House of Refuge. We love them. So here's the deal. Yeah, okay, let's go. Got some excitement about that. So this one's a little bit different. It's not just go to your closet and grab out the perishable foods, non-perishable foods. You want to get sheets. You want to get toilet paper, paper towels, dish settings. You're going to get a whole cart of this stuff. Here's the deal. All the women in the room, you guys get a free pass to go to Target this week, okay? That's where you're going to go and grab all this stuff and bring it back next week. Let's bless the socks off this community. Should we do that? Yeah, can we do that? Okay, that's awesome. Hey, if you're joining us online today, thanks so much for tuning in. No matter where you're at, no matter how far away you are, we love that you can stay connected. And we are in week 2 of Anatomy of Intimacy. If you weren't here last week, we kicked off this series with Joel. It was fun. We had a lot of fun. A lot of men in the room. We're a little bit tight. Get you to open up a little bit around the relationship series, but we're going to have fun today. So do this. Before we keep this going, just turn to somebody around you, somebody new. Just give them a high five, maybe an elbow if you're worried about the virus that's spreading around here, and let's keep this thing going.
When darkness tries to roll over my bones, when sorrow comes to steal the joy I own, when brokenness and pain is all I know, oh, I won't be shaken, I won't be shaken. Oh, my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in You were the Word at the beginning, one with God the Lord Most High. Your hidden glory in creation, now revealed in you are Christ. What a beautiful name it is. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a beautiful name it is. Nothing compares to this. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus. Man, it is good to ring that truth in with you guys today, that the name of our Heavenly Father, his Son, he sent Jesus to die in our place, to show us an example of how to love the people around us. Gosh, what a powerful name. It is great to sing those words with you guys this morning. You can go ahead and take a seat, and we're going to continue. Our volunteers are going to come forward as we give of our tithes and our offerings.
We're brought here today by the love that Sarah and Davis have for each other.
I can't believe I get to marry him. We're perfectly compatible in every way.
Yeah, she just gets me, man.
Someone to talk to all night long.
Someone to talk to all night long.
Early morning jogs.
Sleeping in late.
We'll spend the holidays with my parents.
We'll spend the holidays with my parents.
We'll have one well-behaved daughter.
We'll have 4 or 5 little dudes running around.
He'll help me pay off my debt.
I should probably tell her about all my debt. Is that important? We'll share a bank account.
Obviously, we're gonna share a Facebook account.
Do I need to friend my in-laws?
Someone to do my laundry.
Someone to do my laundry.
Double income.
Stay-at-home dad.
Meal planning, of course.
Takeout.
The city.
The burbs.
Mission trip.
Ski trip.
Blue.
Red.
Cat.
Dog.
Fries.
Rings.
Potato.
Potato.
Minivan.
Motorcycle.
2 words. Finished basement.
2 words. Man cave.
He's so smart.
Do you think that birds wish that they had hands?
We're going to be so happy.
We'll be so happy. I'm gonna crush it at being a husband.
It seemed like a lot of nervous laughter, like some of you have been there before. If you didn't know what you were walking into today, we're continuing a relationship series that we kicked off last week. Guys, after today, we only have 2 parts left, so you're gonna make it through it, I promise. You're gonna be good. But we started this series last week, and I told you this. It doesn't matter if you're married or not married, if you're in a relationship, if you're not in a relationship, if you just got out of a relationship, if you're trying to get out of a relationship, if you wanna get into a new relationship. We're not necessarily talking about specifically the dynamics or the sort of the parts of the series or the parts of a relationship that I think most often we get fixated on. What we're talking about in this series is the anatomy of relationships. And I told you last week, specifically, when we say anatomy, we mean the inner workings of something as revealed by the dissection of its parts. So we're pulling apart relationships, and we're specifically looking at sort of what's foundational to healthy, intimate relationships. And this is not a self-help series, though I think it's gonna be helpful. It'll be helpful for you, again, whether you're preparing for your next relationship or if you're navigating your current one. It's not a behavioral modification series, so it's not really about how to have better communication skills or about how to handle money together, but I think it could change some of your behavior related to your relationships. But what we're talking about in this series is the 4 foundational inner workings to relationships, and specifically, there's 4 components specifically that lead us to intimate relationships. And those 4 components are this: it's accessibility, humility, exclusivity, and security. And we're gonna spend a week talking about each one of these. And last week we talked about accessibility. We went all the way back to the very beginning, to Genesis 1. And what we discovered is when God had things the way he wanted them, the way he described the relationship, was that the man and woman, Adam and Eve, they were naked and they were unashamed, both literally and metaphorically. And so last week we talked about the fact that intimacy requires accessibility. There has to be access. And the most intimate relationships are the relationships where there's the greatest amount of access. And you think about this, this is just how relationships deepen. As you give somebody more access to who you are, what they know about you, your past, what you think about things, your opinions, your feelings about things, your sort of state of emotions. As you do that, you grow in intimacy because you grow in accessibility. But access, as we talked about last week, it has to be given wisely. It has to be given freely. It has to be given fully. If you weren't here, we unpacked each of those last week. I think it's worth going back and listening to, but I don't have time to recap all that. But the one thing I do want to remind us is in every relationship that you walk into, whether you just started a relationship this last week, whether you've been married for a really long time, you carry 2 boxes into that relationship. And you have your stuff, and whether you realize it or not, you have stuff. And we talked about this last week. You have all sorts of stuff, not just the physical stuff. Did I do that backwards? I think I got these backwards, sorry. Your stuff, you have, some of you brought some of these into a relationship. Some of you brought one of these into a relationship. I spent a lot of time talking about that last week. Some of you had one of these when you came to a relationship, but you not only brought stuff like that, you brought successes and failures and strengths and weaknesses. You brought past life experiences, positive and negative. You brought in things that you learned and things that needed to be unlearned. You brought in good habits and habits that needed to be broken. All of that are things you brought into a relationship, and the other person, whether they knew it or not, all of that came with you. In addition to that, you have, and most of that was connected to your past, you had a series of things that were connected to the future. That either in this relationship or along with this relationship or as a part of this relationship, you had certain desires. You had certain desires for what you would experience with this person, with them in your relationship with each other, with them together in life, maybe adventures, maybe hopes and dreams and desires, things you've been thinking a long time ago, and stated or unstated, all of those things you brought into that relationship. And what we said last week is few things are more intimate than when our relationships, we come to a relationship and we take my stuff and my stuff becomes our stuff and my desires become our desires. Because when you begin to share, you have shared ownership of all of these things, past, present, future, your assets, your liabilities, your successes, your failures, all of your hopes and dreams. When you begin to share these things, and there's shared ownership, there's few things that are that are more intimate than that. I mean, you being willing to share all of those things with somebody, be completely, as the scriptures taught it, naked and unashamed, not needing to hide anything. I mean, that is almost the epitome of intimacy. Now, for today, I want to talk about where this goes wrong. And for that, I need some help. And I'm going to need a couple, and I'm looking for a very specific couple. I'm looking for a couple, maybe somebody in their 20s that's newly married. Maybe you're newlyweds, or you're engaged, or you've been together for at least a year. Anybody willing to we had a great couple that decided, I'm just going to keep stalling until I find somebody who's willing to raise their hands. Anybody willing to do that? You're newer. Yeah, would you guys come up here real quick? She's like, I can't believe you did this to me. Come on, let's give them a big round of applause. You guys come up here. That's awesome. Thank you so much. You come up here, I'm gonna grab a microphone. So here's the thing, as they're making their way up here, you guys can come right around this direction and come on right up here in the front. As they're coming up here, here's what happens. Oftentimes in a relationship, we don't move from my stuff and my desires to our stuff and our desires. Hey guys, how are you? Come on right up here. What happens is there's a different sort of exchange that happens. So before we get there, I want to get to know you guys a little bit. Can you tell everybody your name?
Jordan.
Jordan and?
Lauren.
Lauren. And tell me about the nature of your relationship.
We have been married for 2 years. 2 years in April. And she's expecting our first. So.
Yes, congratulations. That's awesome. That's awesome. So tell me a little bit about you guys. Tell me, I'm gonna start with you. Tell me about your background, your family, where you grew up, maybe parents at home, did they both work? Just a little bit of background on you.
So I grew up here. My dad worked, he was a pilot, and my mom would stay at home with us until I was like sophomore in college, or high school.
Okay.
She started working.
Siblings?
Yeah, I have an older and a younger sister.
That's awesome. Good. Okay, how about you, Jordan?
Similar, I'm from Virginia. My dad's actually visiting, so he's here today. But he was a dentist. My mom was a stay-at-home mom for my entire life. And
I moved out here for my dream job and then met my wife, so.
You moved out for the dream job and you met the dream girl.
Exactly.
How about that? Life is working out for you.
It is.
That's awesome. That's cool. And do you have siblings?
One younger brother.
Okay, cool. So you each have one sibling? Oh, you have two. That's right. I'm sorry, I missed that. So you have one, you have two. So here's the thing. Whether you guys recognize this or not, when you came into your relationship, as we talked about last week, you brought certain backgrounds, certain things. Now, did you guys have any family traditions when you were growing up? Anything that you guys did, like, that you would say was unique to your family?
We always had like a family vacation.
Family vacations? You did a lot of family vacations. How about you? Anything similar or different, unique to that?
No, we like to camp. I remember camping a lot growing up.
Okay, that's good. So these guys come into a relationship, and again, this often happens in relationships, and we talked about this last week. Whether you know it or not, whether the things are stated or not, you come into a relationship, and each of these guys had stuff. You can stay right where you are. Each of these guys had stuff when they came into the relationship. But instead of, and I'm not saying this happened with you guys, but what happens oftentimes, instead of them taking shared ownership for their stuff, what happens is one of them passes the stuff just directly to the other one of them. And the stuff that was in the box, no, you get to keep this one. Whether you realize it or not, there were all sorts of stuff that turned into assumptions in the relationship. And this isn't all bad, but whether you realize it or not, and whether it was stated or not, the way you talked about it, maybe hopefully somebody forged some good conversation for you, but if they didn't, quickly you realize she had certain assumptions about how things were gonna operate. Maybe because of the family she grew up in, she expected at some point when they were expecting, she was gonna be a stay-at-home mom, and there wasn't gonna be two incomes, and there wasn't gonna be, all sorts of other things. And maybe you had a similar expectation, or you grew up in a home where maybe you struggled financially, and because your mom didn't work, it was like, no, I think we're both gonna work all the time, whether we have kids or not. But there were all sorts of assumptions, and not only that, there's certain desires. They each had certain desires, but those desires oftentimes get passed, and he had certain desires, and when he handed his box of desires to her, they began to feel like expectations for her. And all of a sudden, I'm supposed to fulfill these expectations, either to be, as we talked about this last week, either to be like something you experienced in your past, in your home with your family, or to be different than that. And instead of sharing our stuff and sharing our desires, what we do is we trade them. And when our spouse and our significant other doesn't fulfill our assumptions or our expectations, you can see his expectations are heavy because it's starting to drop down. She's not holding it quite as high. Sorry. It's real. The struggle's real. So, but when those desires and assumptions, they don't get, those expectations, they don't get met, we don't just feel disappointed. Come on, let's just be honest. We feel cheated. We do. Now, you wouldn't say that because that's not politically correct. You wouldn't say, hey, he didn't fulfill his desire, he didn't meet this expectation, I feel cheated. But deep down inside, you feel like, well, that's what's a wife and a husband for? I mean, that's what they're there for. That's what they're supposed to do. In fact, in some way, again, you wouldn't say this out loud because it sounds arrogant and selfish, but they owe it to you, don't they? I mean, that's what they vowed. That's what they promised. That's what they signed up for when they got married 2 years ago. For better or for worse was what they said, right? And when you get to this place where there's failed assumptions and failed expectations, what happens is you begin to feel cheated, and there begins to feel challenges, and it actually becomes for worse. Now, nobody sets out to do that because nobody's looking for that type of relationship. And we would say we don't keep score. But the reality is flawed assumptions and failed expectations create a debt-debtor relationship for all of us. And debt-debtor relationships, there's nothing intimate about that. Did you guys get into marriage for a debt-debtor relationship? No. Anybody in here get into marriage to have somebody you would feel in debt to all the time? No. So here's the thing. This is what you need to realize. In some respects, whether it's happened already or it's gonna happen, they're gonna slip into the temptation, because we all do this. They're gonna slip into temptation where she feels like he owes her. He owes her. And she assumes he'll meet all her needs. Or she owes him and he expects she'll fulfill all his desires. So I just wanted you guys to know what you're in for. So thank you so much for volunteering for us. You guys can actually go ahead and have a seat. Thank you so much. Give them a big round of applause one more time. Okay. So awesome. Thanks for being willing to play him along. Don't punish him too much for making you come up here. Here's the thing. If I had done that to my wife, I'd been in a lot of trouble. In fact, she told me, if you invite me up there, I'll be really, really mad. So here's the thing. A debt-debtor relationship, this is the most important part of this. A debt-debtor relationship eliminates the possibility of unconditional love. Just think about this. If I owe you, I can't love you. Owe you and love you can't coexist. Because if I owe you, there's what I give to you, when I give something to you, even if I try to do it out of love, I'm just meeting your expectation. I'm just doing what you assumed I would do. A while back, my wife reminded me very gently that I owed her a kid-free day of shopping and a trip to the spa. And I tried this on her, not really successfully, but I said, well, listen, babe, listen, if I owe you shopping and a spa, I can't really give it to you. It's payment, it's not love. So you gotta let me give it to you when I'm ready to give it to you. And she's like, I don't care what it is. As long as I get to go shopping and I get to go to the spa, it doesn't matter. So, but we get into these things where it's like we trade favors, or it's like you did it last time and now it's my turn to do it, or I took them last time, or I carded everybody last time, now it's your turn to do it, or I put them to bed, now it's your turn to put them to bed, or I went and made this happen, or I sacrificed and now it's your turn. And we do this. And we get into relationships and we do that, it really is for worse. And Paul gives us an incredible solution to this. It's not easy, but it's very simple. If you have a Bible, Ephesians chapter 5, you can open your Bible, if you open your device. I'm just gonna jump straight in because I'm gonna make everybody mad today, so I'm gonna be an equal opportunity offender. But Paul gives he just goes to the heart of it and gives us a great solution. Ephesians chapter 5, verses 22, he says this: wives, submit to your own husbands. There's the solution. It's simple. I don't even know if we need to go on from there. It's like, there it is. Just to stir things up a little bit. I don't know, maybe it's in response to last week and the garden debacle. It's like, well, we saw what happened last time when she led the relationship. So wives, here's what you're gonna do. I don't know where that comes from. But now, wives or ladies, before you think I'm a misogynist, just hang on for a second. It gets better, but it actually gets worse before it gets better. He says, wives, submit to your own husbands, look at this, as you do to the Lord. So here's Paul. He slaps down the God card and he's like, look, wives, you got to do this. And guess what? You're not responsible to him. You're responsible to God for submitting to your husbands. To which all the husbands and all the men said, they're going to be in a lot of trouble for that. But here's the thing, ladies. We in our culture, we want to push back on this, and we have a problem with this. But here's what you need to know: this has been misused. This is so messy and so muddy. In fact, people outside of the church look into the church, oftentimes, or versions of Christianity, and they see how women get treated because of verses like this, or things that are said about women, or things that are basically expected of women. And again, I'm not just talking about currently. I'm talking about in our past. This is part of our history as a church. They look in and they think, no way. I'm not doing that. I don't want to be a part of that. But here's the thing. We messed this all up because we took this way out of context, and it's been being taken out of context for decades, for generations. Because here's an important detail. Most of us probably don't know this. Do you know the original Greek doesn't include the word submit? It's not even in there. If you were to translate the original language, this is what it says. It says, wives, to your own husbands as to the Lord. To which, if I'm a lady, I'm thinking, okay, I want to know what dude decided he was going to throw the word submit in there? What? And obviously he had some agenda, and it was like, okay, we're going to need some help. We'll just slip this in here, and then nobody will ever know it's in English, and nobody's going to study the Greek part of the text anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So we'll just slide it in there. How did that happen? How did it go about, and how did this become such a popular verse? Well, here's the thing. The way it got fit in there was through a common literary technique. But it actually is very revealing to the purpose and the context of this verse. It actually infers what happened in the previous verse. And it's interesting how much press this verse gets. But the one before it, which actually starts the conversation in verse 21, this is what it says. It says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Like both of you, it's mutual. And do it out of reverence for Christ, not for one another. Prioritize each other's needs ahead of your own, like Christ did for you. You're gonna do this out of reverence to him, and you should both do it. We're gonna come back to this, but it should be like a submission competition. Like that's what you're both doing. You're both trying to submit. Well, how do we both submit? I don't know. You should compete for that space. Who gets to submit? Well, who's gonna submit first? This is what this is gonna be. And it's like, well, that doesn't even make sense. How do you do that? And what follows builds on this. That's why the word submit gets put into the next verse. He starts with wives and he says, wives, as I said, you're gonna submit to one another. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. Now, why does he start with wives? Simple. In their culture, nobody was gonna bat an eye with this. He's building rapport. He's just trying to state what everybody already believes because this was assumed. There was no surprise. In their culture, men had legal authority over everything. When a woman was pledged to be married to a man, the father of the daughter gave the dowry or inheritance or whatever came along with her, not to his daughter to carry into the marriage. He gave it directly to the husband. And the reason was, because she couldn't legally own things. And if they didn't want to lose it to the state or they didn't want to lose it to the government or to somebody else, the father had to give it to the son-in-law, to the new husband, because if he didn't, it would be lost because she couldn't have any legal authority over anything or any ownership over anything. Now, when we think about this, we think, okay, but this is the 21st century. Things don't really work like that for now or anymore. And then the first thing that comes to the surface, and it's so interesting because we've seen this go bad so many times. The first thing that comes to the surface is an objection, and the objection is, what about men who aren't worth submitting to? What about the men? There we go. Right there. She'd testify. What about the men who are? So let me just go ahead and answer for you and everybody else. Did you know that's 100% of men? That's who it is. But the verse didn't say submit to him because he's worth it or because he was somebody who deserved it. He said prioritize his needs and desires, not because he deserves it, but out of reverence for Christ. Now here's the thing. This is important. I want to pause. There are some in this 100% that are worse than others. And when it comes to a situation, I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't respect yourself or you should get taken advantage of or you should put up with abuse. That's completely different. That's about having boundaries. That's about protecting your heart. That's about having your own dignity, which we're going to talk about in a second because Paul was really concerned with that. That's not what I'm saying. So don't take it to that extreme. It's just saying, wives, when you run into that stalemate, when it comes to a clash of wills, when it comes to a place where it's like, do you go with his desires or your desires? Do you go with his will or his needs or your needs? It just says, listen, here's what I want you to do. I want you to submit to your husband in those moments. Now, a few verses later, he gets to the men. And when he talks to the men, it was both unexpected and it was offensive in their culture. Like, we don't focus on these, and I don't know how these ones got lost, but he goes way beyond what he says to wives. He says, remember, it's in the context of submit to one another. Husbands, love your wives. And this isn't the shocking part. That actually seems a little less demanding and almost mushy. But look at this next part, which he gives perspective to what love looks like. Husbands, love your wives. You know what that looks like? You should love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. This goes beyond, but includes submitting. This is prioritize her needs and desires, and if necessary, surrender or sacrifice everything for her, just as Christ did for you. It's submitting, but it's far more than submitting. It's lay down your life, lay down your desires, lay down your needs for her. Apparently, Paul thought we needed further detail. Like the women just needed one verse. We needed multiple verses. He goes on, he says, look, in the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as they do their own bodies, which I just have to pause real quick. There's a little bit flawed because the bar definitely gets lower the older I get in terms of loving my own body. So sorry about that, babe. But here's what he's saying. His point is this. Look, you need to love and protect and look out for and care for her the same way you do yourself. The same way you do your own body, the same way you try to protect yourself from danger, the same way you try to protect yourself from unnecessary risk. You need to do the same thing for your wife. And here's why, because he who loves his wife loves himself, which that's interesting. How is that and why is that? We have to go back to last week. See, the Apostle Paul's teaching in the context of what the scriptures talks about a relationship between a husband and wife. The husband was to leave his father and mother, and the two to become one flesh, as we saw last week. The two would become one. So when you love your wife, you actually love yourself. Now, this is an aside, this isn't the main point of today, but I just gotta pause here real quick. What we don't realize is going on here that's incredibly offensive is this is a bold countercultural statement of the equality and dignity of women. He's basically saying, look, she's just like you. She has the same value as you. She has the same worth as you, and you should treat her that same way. I find it hilarious that in our culture, we murmur about the wives submit to your husbands, but do you know in that culture, the religious leaders, the Roman leaders who actually made all the rules, all of them would have been indignant. This was an outrageous claim. Society didn't work that way. Society worked on the authority of men. It sort of function on the legal authority and the leadership of men in their society. And this seems odd to us. This all seems backward to us because in our society generally, and we don't always get this right, but even more recently this has been a push, we at least strive for the equality of both men and women in all ranges, in all places in culture, in all arenas of culture. We at least try to that. But here's the thing. Do you know where that originated? Like, do you know where that started? Have you ever done research? Have you ever looked back into history? I love history. If you look back, do you know that this originated with Jesus? In fact, it cannot be traced. The value of women in society cannot be traced to any other society or religion outside of Jesus and his teaching and the teaching of the New Testament. The equality, the dignity, the worth, and value of women is a uniquely Christian ideal, which makes it so ironic that some have used these scriptures and these passages to devalue and manipulate women. There's certain versions of Christianity that use it almost in an oppressive way against women. And that's couldn't be more against the point of this passage. Paul's saying you need to submit to one another. Wives, you should submit to your husbands. And it was almost like that was a softball, like, of course, everybody thinks you should do that. But husbands, you should even go beyond what she's doing. You need to sacrifice your lives as if she's more valuable and she's more important. You need to surrender. You need to love her like you love yourself, because when you do that, you actually love yourself. And he continues with this train of thought, and he goes on and he says this. He says, after all, no one's ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body just as Christ did the church. For we are members of his body. And this is, throughout the New Testament, how the church is talked about in relationship to Jesus. Here's this point. Jesus as the head of the church, this role of men as the head of the role in a relationship with women. It's not a role of necessarily power. It's a role of provision. It's a role of responsibility. And the same way that Christ is the head of his body, which is the church, men, you're to be head of the relationship with your wife. You're to take responsibility for this submission competition. And then the verses I just told you about a minute ago that we looked at last week, he quotes Moses to conclude. He says this. He says, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. For what reason? For the reason of being an illustration, for being the type of picture for your marriage relationship. The goal of this oneness, this intimacy, this accessibility, this I'm gonna sacrifice for you is to reflect the type of relationship that Jesus made possible between God and man. That's the reason, to be an illustration of the deep, intimate relational connection God wants with each one of us. However, if that's gonna happen, in application, he says, if that's gonna happen, however, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself. It's sort of a reiteration or a summary. Husbands, you gotta prioritize and care for her desires and for her stuff, for what's in her box. You need to, instead of them being assumptions and expectations of you, you need to take responsibility for going, you know what? I'm gonna take my stuff and her stuff, and it's gonna become our stuff. And I'm gonna take responsibility for taking the lead in this. And I'm gonna make sure that when there's a clash of wills, we're gonna have shared ownership of these things. This is what this looks like. This is what we talked about last week. What it looks like is me deciding that when there's a clash of these things, I'm gonna prioritize her over me. But you can't do that if you don't actually know what her desires and what her needs are. See, in 1 Peter 3, Peter gives us the instruction that husbands are to live with their wives according to knowledge. I love talking to guys in premarital counseling about this. Here's basically what that means. It means to be a relentless student of your wife, to be a relentless student of the person that God's brought into your life, the daughter of his that he's entrusted to you. To make sure you're keenly aware of her wants and her needs and her fears and her frustrations and her joys and her pains, like what's actually going on, what's happening in her life in the past or even in the recent past, like what's actually happening. And as she looks to the future, what is she hoping will be different? Or what is she hoping will stay the same or you'll never leave? It's you've got to be a student of what's actually going on in here because it doesn't stay the same. That was probably the most obvious point of today. This is always changing. It's not a game. It's part of humanity. We're always shifting and changing, and these things are changing. So guys, here's your application. Your specific application is to find out what's in her box. What's in your box? It's asking this question. What's in your past that maybe we haven't talked about or you haven't felt like I actually cared about, or things that you want me to know about? What are the things that we haven't fully discovered about one another? Or what are your hopes and dreams for the future? Like prioritizing this. But I will say this, guys. Don't ask the question. Don't even go there. Don't even begin and initiate the conversation unless you pre-decide that whatever you discover in the box will be so important to you that you'd be willing, if necessary, to sacrifice what's in the box that's yours for what's in the box that's hers. It's your box collectively. It's all of your stuff mixed in there together. But at times, when you're trying to go, hey, which desires are we gonna focus on? Like, what are we gonna do with our time? Or what's the future look like? And how are we gonna invest? And what does security look like in the future? I mean, as you're trying to decide, at some point, there's gonna be a clash of wills. And what you need to pre-decide is that when you discover what's in the box, you'd be willing, if necessary, to sacrifice what's in there that's yours for what's in there that's hers. That's what the Apostle Paul was instructing us to do. He says, however, you must love your wives as loves himself. And then he goes on and he says this, and the wife, she must respect her husband. This isn't a different instruction. This is a reiteration of the idea of submitting to your husband. Ladies, do you know that respect is something that you freely choose to express to your husbands? And guys, this isn't something you can demand. It's not like you can take her this verse and go, well, this is what the scripture says. You're not being respectful and you need to respect me. Here's why that doesn't work. It's because, first of all, you can't demand respect from someone. Most of us have had a boss that tried to do that, right? And that didn't go so well. Like it just doesn't work. You can't demand respect from somebody. Not only that, here's the thing, this is so important. It's not between you and her. It's between her and the Lord. She's instructed to submit to her husband. She's instructed to respect out of reverence for Christ. Do you know what's interesting to me in the scriptures? One of the most interesting things to me in the Bible is that, did you know that nowhere in the New Testament, all the instruction we're given in relationships, all the instruction we're given about marriage and husbands and wives, do you know that there's not one place where wives are instructed to love their husbands? Is that interesting? Do you know why I think that is? It's because being a man, I think God knew that we men would feel most loved when we had the respect of the one we loved the most. When the one that I love the most, I know respects me deeply and chooses on a regular basis to lift me up with her words, with her affirmation, with her encouragement to other people in front of me. When I feel respected in our relationship, I feel loved just about more than any other way. And he also knew that worked in the same way with women who would feel loved when they were honored and prioritized and sacrificed for. When men decided they were going to lay down their strength and lay down their wills, and they were going to lay down their desires, they were going to lay down, their great ideas to sacrifice for their wives. So ladies, the application's the same for you. You gotta ask the same question, what's in your box? And here's the important difference. Because respect is such a big deal with men, you gotta figure out a way to do this in a way that he doesn't feel attacked or inadequate or threatened or disrespected, because sometimes it's like, hey, so I'm just curious, like, what are you hoping for this year, in 5 years? Where do you see us in 10 years? And it's like, is this a test? Like, am I supposed to have an answer to this? Are we just talking? Or if what I say, do we have to be committed to for 10 years? Like, we just don't know. And it's like, well, hey, your mom told me something interesting about when you were growing up, and how come you never told me that? And now it feels like an interrogation. You gotta figure out how to sidestep all of that. And that's our insecurity. The reality is sometimes we can't help that. And you gotta figure out how to figure out and ask what's in the box so that you can figure out, how do I lift him up? How do I lift this up? How do I lift my husband up? Lift these desires up in this relationship. See, this is what the submission competition's all about. It's trying to discover, trying to know, trying to prioritize the needs and the desires of our spouse, the needs and desires of our significant other. But the key component to this, do you know the inner working that makes all of this go? Anybody? It's humility. See, this is the second core component, key component to relationships, to experiencing intimacy. Humility leads to intimacy. Just think about it. Humility draws us in, where pride is sort of repels us. Pride and arrogance, it sort of pushes us away. Guys, when we decide, I'm gonna sacrifice, I'm gonna lay down my desires for my life, I'm gonna decide her before me, you first. I'm gonna prioritize you and your needs and your desires. That does something to cause them to be drawn toward us. Ladies, I'm telling you, when you decide, I'm gonna elevate my husband, and I'm gonna elevate his needs, I'm gonna elevate his desires, I'm gonna elevate him with my words, and I'm gonna elevate him with my work and service toward him. I'm gonna lift him up, I'm gonna respect him. Do you know that draws him towards you? So this is two sides of the same coin. It's ironic. With all of that instruction, the Apostle Paul's saying just one thing to all of us is, you should approach your relationship with humility to one another. Do you know, most marriage counseling situations that I engage in oftentimes usually end up coming to my office. I end up sitting down with people because there's some sort of standoff or stalemate. There's something that they've come to a place where it's like, we can't get past this. Things have come to a head, and oftentimes it's different versions of the same thing. And everybody walks in, and I don't mean this to be offensive, but everybody I meet with, it's like they think their situation's unique, like nobody else has experienced, but it's just different names and different circumstances and different backgrounds and different substances. That's all it is. And most of the time it's, if he would start doing X, Y, and Z, then I'd be willing to do X, Y, and Z. Or if she would stop doing X, Y, and Z, I'd be more likely to start doing X, Y, and Z. And what usually happens is there's one person who feels like they continue to give in and give in. They've been sacrificing over and over. They feel like they're the one who's always losing. Because I'll just tell you this, most oftentimes in these situations, there's a giver and there's a taker. Because when there's two takers, the relationship's over. Like when you get in a relationship and you got two takers, the relationship doesn't work. And obviously what we're talking about today is the ideal is you're both givers. But usually when you get in a situation like that, there's a giver and there's a taker. And the taker finally gets to the place where they're going, you know what? I'm not doing this anymore. The giver's going, I'm not doing this anymore. I've been giving over and over and over. I'm always the one that's losing. I'm always the one that's giving, and I'm tired of it. I thought eventually they would turn. I thought eventually if I served them enough, they would turn. And so things come to me, and the truth is it's like there's a stalemate. It's like I'm not giving anymore, and the taker's going, well, wait a minute. We've been doing this a long time. This is a nice arrangement. I mean, we've been doing this since the very beginning. You give and I take. Like, what's wrong with that? Like, this works out well. And so things have come to a head, and here's the ultimate question. And people hate when I do this. I boil it down to things, and they're like, no, but listen to my story. And I'm like, no, here's your question. Your question to me is, who has to go first? That's what your question is. You want me to play referee for who has to go first, who has to do something to make up for, who has to make something right, or who has to change their behavior so that the relationship can be fixed. Don't miss this. This is a universal principle. I don't care who your relationship's with, what circumstance you're in. If who goes first determines who the loser is, there can be no winner. If who goes first to serve the other person is the loser, there can be no winner. That person loses, the relationship loses, and ultimately the person that's the taker loses because they're not being loved. They're just getting what they think's owed to them. That's not what God dreamed for you. That's why the Apostle Paul said, listen, humility asks a different question. Humility's question is, who gets to go first? Who gets to go first? In this situation, who gets to go first? No. Imagine this is your conversation. Imagine this is the argument. No. Last time you got to sacrifice your desire for mine. No, last time we spent the extra money on me and not on you. Last time I got to go golfing with the guys and I got to go on this thing. This time you're going to get to go with the girls. I mean, imagine those are your debates. Imagine those are the types of arguments you're having rather than, no, it's my turn. Or no, you owe me or you have to give to me. That's why the Apostle Paul, the big overarching idea from the very beginning was submit to one another. And don't do it because they deserve it. Don't do it because they submitted to you last time. It's not between you and them. You need to do it out of reverence for Christ. Paul, in a different place in Philippians, he said this. He said, look, you need to have the same mindset in your relationships as Christ Jesus, who though he was God, didn't consider equality with God or equality with you something to be held onto. He didn't consider that something that he had to hold on to. Instead, he surrendered his rights and his privileges. And he humbled himself as a servant. And ultimately, when his needs and his desires clashed with ours, he chose death. He chose to sacrifice what was in his box to prioritize what was in yours. It's powerful. I'm telling you, that is the power source from which you draw to prioritize the needs, the desires of your spouse. When you choose humility as Christ did, you invite Christ and his power into your relationship. Here's something you need to know. Regardless of your struggle, regardless of the difficulty, when you invite Christ's power into your relationship, you have hope. And here's why. Because he's never lost a battle. Not one time. I don't care what the circumstances. When the power of Christ is on your side, when your attitude is the same as Christ Jesus, and in humility, out of reverence for Christ, you choose to, ladies, lift your husbands up. Men, lay your desires, sacrifice yourself for her. You invite his power into your relationship, and he can conquer any challenge, any circumstances, any struggle that you're facing. We're going to conclude the song. And this song, I hope you'll just allow to wash over you. It's powerful words. I hope you'll listen to the words. They're powerful words that contain a powerful truth that is available for every single one of us, regardless of your relational status as of today. Let me pray for you. God, thank you for this truth. I pray for today that you would allow a light bulb of clarity to go on in somebody's mind. I pray for a relationship today where there is a giver and a taker. And there's somebody who's been a giver for a really long time and they've been struggling. And the truth is they're about out of their ability to give. Their well is running dry and they've been given and they've been given, they've been given. And the taker doesn't even realize it. And they love their spouse and they care for them and they don't even know what's going on. And the truth is I pray today would be a light bulb that would go on. I pray that you'd give them clarity as to what's happening in the relationship. I pray that you would open their eyes to what you did for them and what you sacrificed for them, and that from that well of strength, they would choose to change the dynamic in the relationship, that we would see relationships where there's givers and takers, or maybe there's even takers and people choose to approach relationships differently and be givers so that they could experience the type of intimacy that you designed for us to experience in relationships. God, I pray today that you do a miracle in somebody's life, in somebody's relationship, and that they would experience the power of your conquering power in their lives and in their relationship as a result of their willingness to follow your example in humility. And I pray in Jesus' name, amen.
Such an easy thing for you to do. Your hand is moving right now. You are still showing up at the tomb of every Lazarus. Your voice is calling me out right now. I know you're able, and my God, come through again. You can do all things. You can do all things but fail. 'Cause you've never lost a battle. No, you've never lost a battle. And I know you never will. Everything's possible by the power of the Holy Ghost. A new wind is blowing right now, breaking my heart of stone, taking over like it's Jericho. My walls are crashing down right now. I know you're able, and my God, come through again. You can do all things. You can do all things but fail. 'Cause you've never lost a battle. No, you've never lost a battle. And I know you never will. You can do all things. You can do all things but fail. 'Cause you've never lost a battle. No, you've never lost a battle. And I know you never will. Never lost a battle. You've never lost a battle. You never lost a battle. You never will. Oh, you never will. You never lost a battle. 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 Never lost a battle. You never lost a battle. Never. You can do all things. You can do all things but fail. 'Cause you've never lost a battle. No, you've never lost a battle. I know you never will. You can do all things. You can do all things but fail. 'Cause you've never lost a battle. No, you've never lost a battle. And I know you never will. Sing, I know you never will. I know you never will.
Whew. That is a powerful truth to walk away with today. Do you know your Heavenly Father, through his Son, Jesus, and the power he displayed in his resurrection in your life, he can do all things but fail. That is a source of hope. That is a source of encouragement. And it's a source we hope you'll walk away with today. If you want to talk to somebody about what you heard today, or you want to process, there'll be some folks down front. We're going to provide some resources in the days ahead. We're talking about doing a live Q&A event where you can provide questions for those of you who are wrestling with the content of this series. But we just want you to know we're here for you. And we want to help you. We want to see you succeed. It's why we're unpacking and pulling apart all of this stuff to get to the heart of these challenges. And we hope it's been helpful for you. Have a great week, and we look forward to seeing you next week back here at Mission.